Hi, today we're going to talk about classes. So, in the previous session, we learned about variables, we learned about methods, how to define them, and now we're going to learn about classes. Classes in Scala, honestly, they do not differ so much from other programming languages like C Sharp and Java, but the constructor, they are somehow different. So in this session today, I'm going to explain to you how to create constructor for your class. We have two types of constructor. We're going to explain them, how to instantiate a class, how to create an object, how to create a multi-line string, S string, and make a string for array, because these are all part of the today's session. So let's have a look at the example. This is a class student, right? A very typical classic example of a class that we all know. We have a class student. It has some fields, name, address, list of grade, and list of courses. And then it has two methods, add grade, and then get the average. So let's go and see how we implement this in Scala. I already have the code in Scala to save time, but I'm going to walk you through of how we're doing it. So how do you define a class in Scala? Using the keyword class, and then you have the class name, and then right away you can pass the parameters that you have. And that's the difference between Scala, for example, versus Java. So here I define my class student, and here I pass the fields I have, and then the next thing I have, I define my method add course, I pass the parameters, and then I have another method get average grade, and I just return it. I also have a toString method, and that's my class, as easy as that. So now let's go and check how to create a constructor in Scala. So constructor, I think we all know what they are. Constructor are used to initialize the object's states. Like methods, a constructor also contains a collection of statements. So Scala supports two kinds of constructors. It has primary constructor and auxiliary constructor. In this session, we're going to talk about primary constructor. So in Scala, constructor is the class body, and its parameter list come right after the class name. So here we have the parameters that they are my class. So basically, the class body from here to here are actually part of my constructor. So anything here is going to be initialized by default when I create a new instance of this object student. So all these fields you see here, you can pass to your constructor, right? But if you remember, we had two types of variables in Scala. We had val, right? That was only for read-only immutable variables. And we had var, which is mutable variable that can also change. So when we define our class, we can also say, what do we want this variable to be? If you remember Java, for example, if you would define something as private, you would have getter and setter, and you could be able to have a public or protected, and we have different access type, right? And so here, instead of doing all those complicated stuff, by simply saying, what do we want this variable to be in terms of the access, we can just use val, var, or default, and then we see how it works. Okay, so here is my class, and here I'm instantiating this class. I'm going to talk about how to create an object of a class later on, but for now you can just know that exactly like how you would do in Java. You can just say new class name, and you can pass your variables. You don't even need to say name. Remember, those gray color fonts are only for the help of IntelliJ. It's not part of the code. If I remove this, there's nothing as name, right? So basically you can pass the name, the address, we have an array of courses, and then we have the array of grades, and that's why we are passing. This is actually instantiating an object of a student, And here I'm saying just print the object, right? And what I have, I'm just gonna remove everything here, and let's run this code and see what's going on. Okay, so here it's saying the student name is Mark, the address is this, and the courses are this one, and these are the grades, right? So this is how we instantiate the object. Okay, so now let's have a look and see when we create a primary constructor, right, which comes by default, right, and you don't actually need to define a specific constructor, and as we said, it's the body of the class. You can define different way of defining the variables. Let's say I just say here that I want my name type be a variable from the type string. So what happens here if the name is from the type var? So what happens here is, because this is a mutable object, mutable variable, and can change, then Scala is going to create a getter and setter for this variable. And we can access it from the outside class. Let's try this. I'm going to call this var name, right? The rest could be by default. So here I have my object, right? St, and when I say dot, I will be able to get the name, right? I don't get any compile error. Let's see if I can assign something new to this. Yes, I can. And if I do a print string again, it should give me an updated value. Okay, so now the name changed to Jack. So if you look here, if you notice what happened, we were able to update, right, the value of the object that we had, which was marked to Jack, because here we had var. The second way of doing it, we can also specify a val variable inside my class. And what happens actually is the Scala just create a getter. We are not able to update this value outside this class. So I'm going to change this to val. So if you notice here, I'm able to access, but I'm getting a compiler error that reassignment to val. So I'm not able to update this, but I'm able to just get the value of a state, the name outside this object. Okay. So, and the third one is when you put private val. This means this has access restricted, and only the class member are able to access it. So if I add even private val, it means only from outside the class you're able to from inside. Let's say if I have a method to a string, only this method is able to access this value, this variable. And the last one, if you see here, which is a default, what happens here is this doesn't create any getter and setter. Scala doesn't create any getter and setter, but this will also, the access will be restricted. So I'm going to change this to name. And so if I check here, let's say if I want to say st, if you notice, there's no name here because I can't access it. So if there is nothing specified here, val or var, what happens is you can't access this outside st, and it's become restricted. So let's recap of what we learned. So we learned how to define a class in Scala is as easy as just creating using the keyword class name, parentheses. We pass the parameter here, and then curly braces, and then we add our methods. Also, we said something that the constructor is actually the body of the class. For example, I can just write println here, right, as a body of the class. And when I instantiate my object, if you notice here, I get the welcome to your first class by default because it's part of the constructor, so it executes everything. We also learn how to create a primary constructor. Basically, it comes by default, so we don't need to create, but we can have 4 access type using the var, val, default, and private keywords in our class. So this is for this session. In the next session, we're going to talk about auxiliary constructor. Thank you.